Protect your DNA. BioPQQ can promote formation of new mitochondria. Infowarsstore.com.
This is Rob Dew reporting for Infowars.com and Infowars Nightly News. And looking at trends for the year 2015, I've seen one that I think is very disturbing, and I want to share it with you. And I believe we're going to see an increase of GMO products and the public accepting GM products. And for a while, the public wasn't even aware of these. And it was till people like Jeffrey Smith came out and others who have said, look, we got to really look at these. They're not being studied properly. These are the side effects that we're seeing increases of as we see an increase in GM products being used across the board. Well, now there's hundreds of products being used. And we don't know the full scope of these because the companies like Monsanto and others pay for their own other companies to study them. So they go out and contract with another company and say, you need to study this. Well, it's just like vaccines. Do you think the company's going to come back with a disfavorable report? No, in fact, I'm going to show you an instance where 41 out of 41 of the studies have shown that there's no side effects at all to GM products, which is crazy. But let's start with this article here. This is from Popular Science. In a face-to-face GMO debate, the for-side wins. Will the debate sway you? And this is a debate that happened earlier this month with a pro-GMO side anchored by Robert Fraley, who is Monsanto's chief technology officer, who's been there since the 90s, and then an anti-side, which was anchored by, a couple kind of professor-looking people. Didn't really look like they had their stuff together. In fact, when you look at the two and compare them, the for side was very well spoken if you watch the full video, and the against side was stuttering.
Said not too recently, the days of glyphosate. We've run through the best herbicide that the world's had to offer, and those resistant weeds are leading to more. Those resistant weeds are leading to greater and greater use of herbicides.
GMO technology often gets conflated with Monsanto and Big Ag, but it's actually a breeding tool, one that can be used for many purposes. In my own research in selection for disease-resistant cattle, I use many breeding methods, including classical selection for healthy animals, and more recently the use of DNA markers to assist in selecting for disease-resistant genes.
In fact, they even get called out for once working with the biotech industry. Here's that clip.
Each of these genes is regulated individually and looked at, and they are also looked at collectively. And there is no reason to believe that they have any concern in terms of stacking them together. In fact, Chuck, I remember one of the first times we met, you actually reminded me that the best way to bring this technology into the marketplace was to bring multiple products together so we had more durability and better insect protection. And in so many cases, the industry's done exactly what you've said.
Yes, that's true.
But this debate didn't even really look at the big issues. Both sides seem to be arguing about climate change the whole time. In fact, if you watch the entire video, climate change and global warming is said at least 15, maybe even 20 times during this debate. I started counting about 30 minutes in.
To reduce greenhouse gas emissions, there's as strong a scientific consensus on the safety of GMOs as there is on the role of greenhouse gases and climate change. So that's very important.
With less environmental impact, like crops that are more resilient to climate change.
Feeding 9 billion people without destroying the earth into an environmentally benign activity.
Science around global warming, just like there isn't on global warming.
So it's the way they frame this debate into this climate change, non-climate change. Do we need GMOs to help climate change? Do we not need GMOs to help climate change? Not really talking about the GMOs themselves.
100% alignment, just like there isn't on global warming, but the science speaks for itself here. And
so before the debate, the moderator had everybody vote with their little keypads, and 30% were against GMOs, 32% were for it, and 38% were undecided. Wow, so we're going to have maybe some people swayed here. Well, by the end, 31% were against it, so they only gained 1%, and 60% were for it, a gain of 28 percentage points.
That means the team arguing for the motion, genetically modified food, has carried this debate.
You can't really have an unbiased debate when you have the for side that actually works in the industry, and the against side, which also kind of works in the industry, if on the periphery in the outside in the government sector. So both sides are going to be for government control no matter what. You're really not going to have the debate on whether GMOs are good or bad for us. You're just going to have a debate on whether they should be labeled or whether only certain groups should get them or only certain companies should grow them. And you'll never get the real debate on whether these things are really causing problems or dangerous for us. But let's look at the studies that they keep talking about, all the studies.
As the scientist, I let the data tell me whether there's safety concerns, and after 20 years and thousands of studies, and I feel the weight of the thousands of academic colleagues throughout the world that have done these safety studies that haven't found unique concerns, that I have to accept the evidence for what it is and let the data tell me whether it's safe.
So here in Natural Society, peer-reviewed research proves biotech studies on GMOs are flawed and inaccurate. And it quotes a ScienceDirect.com article, and this is what they had to say about the studies after looking at them. Our review also discovered an inconsistency in the methodology and lack of defined criteria for outcomes that would be considered toxicology or pathologically significant. In addition, there was lack of transparency in the methods and results, which made comparisons between the studies difficult. And the evidence reviewed here demonstrates an incomplete picture regarding the toxicity and safety of GM products consumed by humans and animals. Studies for 9 out of the 47 crops approved for human and/or animal consumption. We can find no studies on the other 38 approved crops. 14 out of the 21 studies were general health assessments of GM crop on rat health, and most of those studies, 76%, were performed after the crop had been approved for human and/or animal consumption. So in conclusion, this popular science debate was framed from the start to get a positive GM result, no matter what anybody else said or what anybody else did. They brought in well-spoken people, put them against bumbling kind of professor types. They weren't really good public speakers, and that makes them have less confidence, which has the people watching them have less confidence in their abilities. And therefore, you're going to get the result in the pro-GMO side. I encourage you to go watch the debate for yourself. And just remember this, back in the 50s and 60s, they were saying smoking's good for you. Agent Orange isn't bad, Army. Don't worry about it. We're just going to spray it on the troops. So there's plenty of times out there that government has been proven wrong. So we always need to be vigilant and do our own research for ourselves. One way you could do your own research is get this book. You can find it anywhere. Seeds of Deception. This is a book I read when I first got here, getting into this, and we had Jeffrey Smith on, and I didn't believe him. I was like, these GM products can't be that bad. They're talking about this being the holy grail of food production. And after I read this, and at the end, what's really amazing is all the indexing that was done, all the sources that are in here. You really need to check this book out for yourself. We sell it in the Infowars store, but you can probably also find it in your library. We also have Genetic Roulette, which talks about the adverse effects related to GE foods, genetically engineered foods. So do your own research. We also have a video series called the GMO Trilogy that you can get for yourself. Now I want to go to one final article. The Secret GMO War, Double Agents, Betrayal, and Greed. This is by investigative reporter John Rappaport, and this is what he had to say earlier this week when he was on the Alex Jones Show about the GMO labeling hypocrisy.
On one side, you've got the people who say, we want to pass mandatory labeling laws that say what's in the food, in the sense that it's going to say this product contains GMOs, genetically modified organisms, okay? On the other side, you got the people who are saying, well, we're going to do this voluntarily, but we're going to do it in a different way. We're going to say this product is non-GMO or GMO-free. Mm-hmm. These two things do not coexist well together. If one side really, especially if mandatory labeling gains the upper hand, if that ever happened across America, then the people who are voluntarily labeling would really be out of business on that score, because there would be no need for what they're doing. Mm-hmm. Now, that happens to be $1 million business, what they're doing. Not only is Whole Foods creating a niche for themselves by saying, well, we've got now 20,000 or 30,000 products that have no GMOs in them. But in order for them to say that, they're sending these products to the non-GMO project, which in turn contracts with labs to do all sorts of testing. This is a multi-million-dollar business that would shrink down very, very small if mandatory labeling came in. So this led me to question, who really wants what here? Is Whole Foods, for example, really in favor of mandatory labeling? Or do they obviously realize that this would put a big crimp in their approach to the whole thing?
Mm-hmm.
And what I've discovered is that people are not always saying what they really believe.
And they're not always who they seem to be, are they? This whole thing about Scott Faber, as you pointed out in your article, executive director of Just Label It, the preeminent organization dedicated to mandatory labeling of GMO foods. But he's also working on the other side, and he has some very, he speaks out in praise of GMO. So here's a guy saying, well, we need to label it, but then he seems to be for GMO. At the same time.
Yeah. And not only that, but in his former position, he was a vice president of the Grocery Manufacturers Association of America.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, this is the group that's poured millions of dollars, also committing, illegal acts, to defeat mandatory labeling in Washington, Colorado, California, Oregon. So, this is a guy who's been talking out of both sides of his mouth. What is he doing being the executive director of Just Label It when prior to that he was trying to defeat labeling?
It's what we see over and over again, isn't it, John? We see people who are working, we see one group that is controlling both sides of the issue. Somebody like Scott Faber is the perfect example of that. Somebody who says, well, I'm going to head up the commission or the organization for mandatory labeling. Meanwhile, he's got connections to the industry, and he makes an amazing statement that you've got here. He says, we do not oppose genetically modified food ingredients. We think there's many promising applications of genetically modified food ingredients. I'm an optimist that the promises that were made by the producers of the technology will ultimately be realized. It will have traits, blah, blah, blah. He goes on with all this in praise of GMO. This is the guy who's out there pushing for labeling. So maybe if we look at this, we start to realize that, as they do in all of these issues, whether it's the presidential election where they control both the Republican and the Democrat, they're controlling both sides of this labeling issue.
In addition to this labeling hypocrisy, we've also seen bill initiatives get defeated in Western states. And then when you look at the money that was for and against these labeling initiatives, Monsanto always comes out on top because they have more money to spend, and they can just weave lies together and make you believe that GMO products aren't bad for you, when in fact they are. So unfortunately, though, I believe with the amount of money and the stupidity of the American who just doesn't want to do their own research, I think you're going to see GMOs come into the forefront this year and become more popular. But we can't stop it. We can get out there, do our own research, make our own videos, and tell people out there about the truth. These things haven't been studied. There have been no long-term tests. They don't even study most of the products that have already been approved. So we have to demand studies, we have to demand independent studies, and we need to start doing it now. If we don't, all will be lost, and one day we're going to wake up with the 50% cancer rate, with the 50% leukemia rate. Everybody's going to be sick and diseased, and we're not going to know why, because the answers were in front of us at that time. But wait, now we've locked down the internet. This has been Rob Dew reporting for Infowars.com. Hope everybody out there has a happy new year and stay informed this year. This could be a year where we change the tide of the many people out there that are just walking around as zombies, falling asleep. We need to do our part. Thank you.
Every year we make resolutions to lose weight and get in shape. And the truth is, it's hard, even with diet and exercise, because of toxic food in our environment that is stressing our bodies more than ever before. Working with experts in nutrition and biochemistry, I found that super high-quality nutraceuticals, in addition to my diet and exercise, were the answers that synergistically worked. I could see the drastic changes every day with the amount of weight I've lost, my increased stamina, and more of a twinkle in my eye. That's why we are now so excited to launch the Infowars Life Resolution Pack, combining 3 essential formulations: oxygen-based cleanser Oxy Powder, the Secret 12 bioavailable vitamin B12, and your choice of super female or super male vitality. Now all available at a discounted price to you and your family to bring in the new year and make 2015 a true success. That's InfoWarsLife.com or 888-253-3139. 2015 is the year to do it, and it all starts at InfoWarsLife.com.